The Final Part to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. Chapter 27. Mike TV is sent by television. Mike TV was even more excited than Grandpa Joe at seeing a bar of chocolate being sent by television.
But Mr. Wonka, can you send other things through the air in the same way? Breakfast cereal, for instance?
Oh, my sainted aunt, don't mention that disgusting stuff in front of me. Do you know what breakfast cereal is made of? It's made of those little purple curly wooden shavings you find in pencil sharpeners.
But could you send it by television if you wanted to, as you do chocolate?
Asked Mike TV. Of course I could.
And what about people? Could you send a real live person from one place to another in the same way?
A person? Are you off your rocker?
But could it be done?
Good heavens, child, I really don't know. I suppose it could, yes. I'm pretty sure it could. Of course it could, but I wouldn't risk it, though. It might have some very nasty effects.
But Mike TV was already off and running. The moment he heard Mr. Wonka saying, "I'm pretty sure it could, of course it could," he turned away and started running as fast as he could towards the other end of the room where the great camera was standing.
"Look at me!" he shouted as he ran. "I'm going to be the first person in the world to be sent by television."
No, 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 no!
"Mike!" screamed Mrs. TV. "Stop! Come back here! You'll be turned into a million tiny pieces!"
But there was no stopping Mike TV now. The crazy boy rushed on, and when he reached the enormous camera, he jumped straight for the switch, scattering Oompa Loompas right and left as he went.
"See you later, alligator!"
he shouted, and he pulled down the switch, and as he did so, he leapt out into the full glare of the mighty lens. There was a blinding flash, then there was silence. Then Mrs. TV ran forward, but she stopped dead in the middle of the room, and she stood there. She stood staring at a place where her son had been, and her great red mouth opened wide, and she screamed, "He's gone! He's gone!"
"Great heavens, he has gone!"
shouted Mr. TV. Mr. Wonka hurried forward and placed a hand gently on Mrs. TV's shoulder.
"We shall have to hope for the best. We must pray that your little boy will come unharmed out on the other end."
"Mike! Mike, where are you?"
screamed Mrs. TV, clasping her head in her hands.
"I'll tell you where he is. He's whizzing above our heads in a million tiny pieces,"
said Mr. TV.
"Don't talk about that,"
said Mrs. TV.
"We must watch the television set,"
said Mr. Wonka.
"He may come through at any moment."
Mr. and Mrs. TV and Grandpa Joe and little Charlie and Mr. Wonka all gathered around the television and stared tensely at the screen. The screen was quite blank.
He's taking a heck of a long time to come across,"
said Mr. TV, wiping his brow.
Oh dear, I do hope that no part of him gets left behind."
"What on earth do you mean?" said Mr. TV sharply.
"I don't wish to alarm you, but it does sometimes happen that only half of the little pieces find their way back to the television set. It happened last week. I didn't know why, but the result was that only half a bar of chocolate came through."
Mrs. TV let out a scream of horror.
"Ah! You mean only half of Mike is coming back to us?"
she cried. Picture time.
Let's hope
it's the top half,"
said Mr. TV.
"Hold everything! Watch the screen. Something is happening."
The screen had suddenly begun to flicker. Then some wavy lines appeared. Mr. Wonka adjusted one of the knobs, and the wavy lines went away, and now, very slowly, the screen began to get brighter and brighter.
"Here he comes! Yes, that's him, all right," yelled Mr. Wonka.
Is he all in one piece?
cried Mrs. TV. I'm not sure. It's too early to tell.
Faintly at first, but becoming clearer and clearer every second, the picture of Mike TV appeared on the screen. He was standing up and waving at the audience, and he was grinning from ear to ear.
But he's a midget,
said Mr. TV.
Mike, are you all right? Are there any bits of you missing?
cried Mrs. TV.
Isn't he gonna get any bigger?
said Mr. TV.
Talk to me, Mike. Say something. Tell me you're all right,
cried Mrs. TV once more. A tiny little voice, no louder than the squeaking mouse, came out of the television set.
Hi, Mom, it said. Hi, Pop, look at me. I'm the first person ever to be sent by television.
Grab him, quick!
Mrs. TV's hand shot out and picked up the tiny figure of Mike out of the screen.
Hooray! He's all in one piece. He's completely unharmed.
You call that unharmed?
Snapped Mrs. TV, peering at the little speck of a boy who was now running to and fro across the palm of her hand, waving his pistols in the air. He was certainly not more than 1 inch tall.
He shrunk,
cried Mr. TV.
Of course he shrunk. What did you expect?
This is terrible. What are we gonna do?
Wailed Mrs. TV. And Mr. TV said,
We can't send him back to school like this. He'll get trod upon. He'll get squashed. He won't be able to do anything,
shouted Mrs. TV.
Oh, yes, I will. I'll still be able to watch television,
squeaked the tiny voice of Mike TV.
Never again, shouted Mr. TV. I'm throwing the television set right out the window the moment we get home. I've had enough of that awful television. Here, give him to me,
said Mr. TV, and he took the tiny boy and shoved him into his breast pocket of his jacket and stuffed a handkerchief on top. Squeals and yells came from inside the pocket, and the pocket shook as the furious little prisoner fought to get out. Picture time.
Mr. Wonka,
wailed Mrs. TV.
How can we make him grow?
Well,
said Mr. Wonka, stroking his beard and gazing thoughtfully at the ceiling.
I must say that's a wee bit tricky, but small boys are extremely springy and elastic. They stretch like mad. So what we'll do, we'll put him in a special machine and have him for testing stretchiness of chewing gum. Maybe that will bring him back to what he was.
Oh, thank you,
cried Mrs. TV.
Don't mention it, dear lady.
How far do you think he'll stretch? asked Mr. TV.
Maybe miles. Who knows? But he's going to be awfully thin. Everybody gets thinner when you stretch it.
You mean like chewing gum?
Exactly.
How thin will he be?
I haven't the foggiest idea, and it doesn't really matter anyway, because soon we'll fatten him up over again. All we have to do is give him triple overdose of my wonderful super vitamin candy. Super vitamin candy contains huge amounts of vitamin A, vitamin B. It also contains vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin F, vitamin G, vitamin I, vitamin J, vitamin K, vitamin L, vitamin M, vitamin N, vitamin O, vitamin P, vitamin Q, vitamin R, vitamin T, vitamin U, vitamin V, vitamin W, vitamin X, vitamin Y, and, believe it or not, vitamin C. The only 2 vitamins it doesn't have in it are vitamin S, because it makes you sick, and vitamin H, because it makes you grow horns on the top of your head like a bull. But it does have in it a very small amount of the rarest and most wonderful magical vitamin of them all. Vitamin Wonka. And what will that make him do? asked Mr. TV anxiously. It'll make his toes grow out until they're as long as his fingers. Oh, no. Don't be silly. It's most useful. He'll be able to play the piano with his feet.
But Mr. Wonka.
No arguments, please.
He turned away and clicked his fingers 3 times in the air, and an Oompa Loompa appeared immediately and stood beside him.
Follow these orders,
said Mr. Wonka, handing the Oompa Loompa a piece of paper on which he had written,
full instructions. And you'll find the boy in his father's pocket. Off you go. Goodbye, Mr. TV. Goodbye, Mrs. TV. And please, don't look so worried. They all come out in the wash. You know. Every one of them.
At the end of the room, the Oompa Loompas around the giant camera were already beating their tiny drums and beginning to jog up and down the rhythm.
There they go again. I'm afraid you can't stop them from singing.
Little Charlie caught Grandpa Joe's hand, and the two of them stood beside Mr. Wonka in the middle of the long, bright room, listening to the Oompa Loompas, and this is what they sang.
The most important thing we've learned, so far as children are concerned, is never, never let them near your television set. Or better still, just don't install the idiotic thing at all. And almost every house we've been, we watch them gaping at the screen. They loll and slop and lounge about and stare until their eyes pop out. Last week in someone's place we saw a dozen eyeballs on the floor. They slit and stare and sit until they're hypnotized by it, until they're absolutely drunk with all that shocking, ghastly drunk. Oh yes, we know it keeps them still. They don't climb out the windowsill. They never fight or kick or punch. They leave you free to cook the lunch and wash the dishes in the sink. But did you ever stop to think, to wonder just exactly what this does to your beloved tot? It rots the senses in the head, it kills the imagination dead. It clogs and clutters up the mind, it makes a child so dull and blind. He could no longer understand a fantasy of fairyland. His brain becomes as soft as cheese, his powers of thinking rust and freeze. He cannot think, he only sees. All right, you cry, all right, you'll say, but if we take the saddle away, what should we use to entertain our darling children? Please explain. We'll answer you this by asking you, what use the darling ones used to do? How use they keep themselves contented before this monster was invented? Have you forgotten? Do you know? We'll say it out loud and we'll say it very loud and slow. They used to read. They'd read and read and read and read and then proceed to read some more. Great Scott, gadzooks, one half their lives was reading books. The nursery shelves had books galore, books cluttered up the nursery store. And in the bedroom by the bed, more books waiting to be read. Such wondrous fine, fantastic tales of dragons, gypsies, queens, and whales, and treasure isles and distant shores, where smugglers rode with muffled oars, and pirates wearing purple hats, and sailing ships, and elephants, and cannibals crouching round the pot, stirring away at something hot. It smells so good, what can it be? Good gracious, it's Penelope! The younger ones had Beatrix Potter with Master Toad, the dirty rotter, and Squirrel Nutkin, and Pigling Bland, and Mrs. T. Winkle, and just how the camel got his hump, and how the monkey lost his rump, and Mr. Toad, and bless my soul, there's Mr. Rat and Mr. Mole. Oh, the books, what books they used to know, those children living long ago. So please, oh please, we beg, we pray, go throw your television set away. And in its place you can install a lovely bookshelf on the wall, then fill the shelves with lots of books, ignoring all the dirty looks, the screams, the yells, the bites and kicks, and the children hitting you with sticks. Fear not, because we promise you that in about a week or two of having nothing else to do, they'll begin to feel the need of having something good to read. And once they start, oh boy, you'll watch them slowly growing joy that fills their hearts, so grow so keen. They'll wonder what they've never seen, and that ridiculous machine, that nauseating, fool, unclean, repulsive television screen. And later, each and every kid will love you for what you did. P.S. Regarding Mike TV, we very much regret that we shall simply have to wait and see if we can get him back to his height, but if we can't, it serves him right.
Picture time. Chapter 28. Only Charlie left.
Which room shall it be next?
Said Mr. Wonka as he turned away and darted into the elevator.
Come on, hurry up. We must get going. And how many children are there left now?
Little Charlie looked at Grandpa Joe, and Grandpa Joe looked back at Little Charlie.
But Mr. Wonka,
Grandpa Joe called after him.
there's only Charlie left now.
Mr. Wonka swung back around and stared. There was a silence. Charlie stood there holding tightly onto Grandpa Joe's hand.
You mean you're the only one left?
Said Mr. Wonka, pretending to be surprised. Why, yes, whispered Charlie. Yes. Mr. Wonka suddenly exploded with excitement.
But, my dear boy, that means you've won!
He rushed out of the elevator and started shaking Charlie's hand so furiously it nearly came off.
Oh, I do congratulate you, I really do. I'm absolutely delighted. It couldn't be better. How wonderful this is. I had a hunch, you know, right from the beginning that it was going to be you. Well done, Charlie, well done. This is terrific. Now the fun is really going to begin, but we mustn't dilly, we mustn't dally. There's even less time to lose now than there was before, and we have an enormous number of things to do before the day is out. Just think of the arrangements that must be made and the people we will have to fetch. But luckily for us, we have the great glass elevator to speed things up. Jump in, my dear Charlie, jump in, and you too, Grandpa Joe, sir. No, after you. That's the way. Now then, and this time I shall choose the button we're going to press.
Mr. Wonka's bright twinkling blue eyes rested on Charlie's face for a moment. Picture time. Something crazy is going to happen now, Charlie thought, but he wasn't frightened. He wasn't even nervous. He was actually terrifically excited, and it was so Grandpa Joe, and so was Grandpa Joe. The old man's face was shining with excitement as he watched every move that Mr. Wonka made. Mr. Wonka was reaching for a button high up on the glass ceiling of the elevator. Charlie and Grandpa Joe both craned their necks to read what it said on the little label beside the button. It said, "Up and out." Up and out, thought Charlie. What sort of room is that? Mr. Wonka pressed the button. The glass doors closed.
Hold on, cried Mr. Wonka.
Then wham! The elevator shot straight up like a rocket. Yippee! Shouted Grandpa Joe. Charlie was clinging to Grandpa Joe's legs, and Mr. Wonka was holding onto a strap from the ceiling, and up they went. Up, 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 up! And straight this time, with no twistings or turnings. And Charlie could hear the whistling of the air outside the elevator as it went faster and faster. Yippee! Shouted Grandpa Joe again. Yippee! Here we go! Faster! Cried Mr. Wonka, banging on the wall of the elevator with his hand. Faster, faster! If we don't go any faster, we shall never get through!
Through what? What have we got to get through? Ha ha! You wait and see. I've been longing to press this button for years, but I've never done it until now. I was tempted many times. Oh, yes, I was tempted. But I couldn't bear the thought of making a great big hole in the roof of the factory. Here we go, boys! Hopping out! But, do you mean? Shouted Grandpa Joe. You don't really mean that this elevator... Oh, yes, I do! You wait and see! Hop! And out! But, it's made of glass. It'll break into 1,000,000 pieces. I suppose it might, but it's pretty thick glass all the same. The elevator rushed on, going up and up and up and faster, and then suddenly, crash! The most tremendous noise of splintering wood and broken tiles came directly above their head, and Grandpa Joe shouted, "Help! It's the end! We're done for!" And Mr. Wonka said, "No, we're not. We're through. We're out." And sure enough, the elevator had shot right through the roof of the factory and was now rising into the sky like a rocket, and the sunshine was pouring in through the glass roof. In 5 seconds, they were 1,000 feet up in the sky. "The elevator's gone mad," said Grandpa Joe. "Have no fear, my dear sir," said Mr. Wonka calmly, and he pressed another button. The elevator stopped. It stopped and hung in midair, hovering like a helicopter.
hovering over the factory and over the very town itself, which spread out below them like a picturesque postcard. Looking down through the glass floor on which he was standing, Charlie could see some small faraway houses, and the streets and the snow that lay thickly over everything. It was an eerie and frightening feeling to be standing on the clear glass high up in the sky. It made you feel that you weren't standing on anything at all.
Are we all right? Said Grandpa Joe. How does this thing stay up? Candy power, said Mr. Wonka. 1,000,000 candy power. Oh, look, there are the other children. They're returning home.
Picture time, guys. This is the great glass. That's the great glass elevator, by the way. And this is the hole in which they punched out of. It's a sugar high. That's actually really funny. Chapter 29. The other children go home.
We must go down and take a look at our little friends before we do anything else,
said Mr. Wonka. He pressed a different button and the elevator dropped lower, and soon it was hovering just above the entrance gates to the factory. Looking down now, Charlie could see the children and their parents standing in a little group just inside the gates.
I can only see 3. Who's missing?
I'm sorry. I can only see 3. Who's missing?
I expect it's my TV, but he'll be coming along soon. Do you see those trucks?
Mr. Wonka pointed at a line of gigantic covered vans parked in a line nearby. Yes, Charlie said. What are they for?
Don't you remember what it said on the golden tickets? Every child goes home with a lifetime supply of candy. And there's 1 truckload for each of them, loaded to the brim. Aha. There goes our friend Augustus Gloop. Do you see him? He's getting into the first truck with his mother and father.
You mean he's really all right? Even after going up that awful pipe?
Oh, he's very much all right. He's changed, said Grandpa Joe, peering down through the glass. He used to be fat. Now he's thin as a straw. Of course he's changed. He got squeezed in the pipe, don't you remember? And there goes Mrs. Violet Beauregard, the great gum chewer. It seems as though they managed to de-juice her after all. I'm so glad, and look how healthy she looks. Much better than before. But she's purple. In the face, said Grandpa Joe. So she is! Ah, well, there's nothing we can do about that.
Good gracious. Look at poor Veruca and Mr. Salt and Mrs. Salt. They're completely covered with garbage.
And here comes Mike TV. Good heavens! What have they done to him? He's about 10 feet tall and thin as a wire. They've overstretched him on the gum-chewing machine. How careless.
How very dreadful for him, said Charlie. Picture time.
Nonsense. He's very lucky. Every basketball team in the country will be trying to get him. But now it's the time we left these 4 silly children. I have something important to talk to you about, my dear Charlie.
Mr. Wonka pressed another button and the elevator swung upwards into the sky. Chapter 30. Charlie's Chocolate Factory. The great glass elevator was now hovering high over the town. Inside the elevator stood Mr. Wonka, Grandpa Joe, and little Charlie.
How I love my chocolate factory,
said Mr. Wonka, gazing down. Then he paused and turned around and looked at Charlie with the most serious expression on his face.
Do you love it too, Charlie?
Oh, yes. I think it's the most wonderful place in the world.
I'm very pleased to hear you say that, said Mr. Wonka, looking more serious than ever.
He went on staring at Charlie.
Yes, I'm very pleased indeed to hear you say that, and now I shall tell you why.
Mr. Wonka cocked his head to one side, and all at once the tiny twinkling wrinkles of a smile appeared around the corners of his eyes, and he said,
You see, my dear boy, I have decided to make you a present of the whole place. As soon as you are old enough to run it, the entire factory will all be yours.
Charlie stared at Mr. Wonka. Grandpa Joe opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out.
It's quite true. I am really giving it to you. That's all right, isn't it?
Giving it to him? Gasped Grandpa Joe. You must be joking.
I'm not joking, my dear sir. I'm deadly serious.
But why should you give your factory to little Charlie?
Listen, I'm an old man. I'm much older than you think, and I cannot go on forever. I've got no children of my own, no family at all. So who's going to run the factory if I get too old to do it myself? Someone's got to keep it going, if only for the sake of the Oompa Loompas. Mind you, there are thousands of clever men who would give anything for the chance to come in and take over for me, but I don't want that sort of person. I don't want a grown-up person at all. A grown-up won't listen to me. He won't learn. He will try to do things his own way and not mine. So I have a child. I have to have one. I want a good, sensible, loving child, one whom I can tell my most precious candy-making secrets while I'm still alive.
So that is why you sent out the golden tickets, cried Charlie.
Exactly. I decided to invite 5 children to the factory, and the one that I liked the best at the end would be the winner.
But Mr. Wonka,
do you really and truly mean that you're giving all of this enormous factory to Charlie? After all, there's no time for arguments. We must go at once and fetch the rest of the family, Charlie's father and mother and everyone else that's around. They can all live in the factory from now on. They can all help run it and until Charlie is old enough to do it by himself. Where do you live, Charlie?
Charlie peered down through the glass elevator at the snow-covered houses that lay below. It's over there, he said, pointing. It's that little cottage right on the edge of the town, the tiny little one.
I see it!
Cried Mr. Wonka, and he pressed some more buttons, and the elevator shot down towards Charlie's house. I'm afraid my mother won't come with us.
Why ever not?
Because she won't leave Grandma Josephine and Grandma Georgina and Grandpa George.
But they must come too.
They can't. They're very old. And they haven't been out of bed for 20 years.
Then we'll just have to take the bed along as well.
And
with them in it. There's plenty of room in this elevator for a bed.
You couldn't get the bed out of the house. It wouldn't go through the door,
said Grandpa Joe.
You mustn't despair. Nothing is impossible. You watch.
The elevator was now hovering over the roof of the Bucket's little house. What are you going to do?
I'm going right on in to fetch them.
How?
Through the roof. No! Stop!
Shouted Grandpa Joe. Crash went the elevator, right down through the roof of the house into the old people's bedroom. Showers of dust and broken tiles and bits of wood and cockroaches and spiders and bricks and cement went raining down on the 3 old ones who were lying in bed, and each of them thought that the end of the world was to come. Grandma Georgina fainted. Grandma Josephine dropped her false teeth. Grandpa George put his head under the blanket. And Mr. and Mrs. Bucket came rushing in from the next room.
Save us!
Shouted Grandma Georgina.
Calm yourself, my darling wife, said Grandpa Joe, stepping out of the elevator. It's only us.
Mother! Cried Charlie, rushing into Mrs. Bucket's arms. Mother, listen what happened. We're all going to live in Mr. Wonka's factory, and we're going to help him run it, and he's going to give it all to me, and... Dear, What are you talking about?
Oh no, said Mr. Bucket. Just look at this house. Just look at this house. It's in ruins.
My dear sir, said Mr. Wonka, jumping forward and shaking Mr. Bucket warmly by the hand. I'm so very glad to meet you. You mustn't worry about your house. From now on, you're never gonna need it again anyway.
Who is this crazy old man?
Screamed Grandma Josephine.
He could have killed us all.
This is Mr. Willy Wonka himself. It took quite a time for Grandpa Joe and Charlie to explain to everyone exactly what had happened back to them that day. And even then, they all refused to head back in the factory in the elevator.
I'd rather die in my bed,
shouted Grandma Josephina.
So would I,
cried Grandma Georgina.
I refuse to go,
announced Grandpa George. So Mr. Wonka and Grandpa Joe and Charlie, taking no notice of the scream, simply pushed the bed into the elevator. They pushed Mr. and Mrs. Bucket in after it. They got in, and then they got in themselves. Grandma Georgina screamed, and the elevator rose up off the floor and shot through the hole in the roof out of the open sky. Charlie climbed onto the bed and then tried to calm the three old people who were still petrified with fear. Please don't be frightened. It's quite safe, and we're going to go on the most wonderful place in the world.
Charlie's right, said Grandpa Joe.
Will there be anything to eat when we get there?
Asked Grandma Josephine.
I'm starving. The whole family is starving.
Anything to eat? Laughed Charlie. Oh, just you wait and see. Picture time. The final picture time. And that's the end, the official end of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Thank you for reading it with me.